Imagine running to your boyfriend to tell him about the worst thing that has happened to you, only for him to become the worst thing that has ever happened to you.
Mabel, what are you doing here?
You see your sister wearing his clothes, kissing him just to spite you.
Once again, she thought someone could really love her. Darling, anyone who has ever been around you was around you because of me.
She says to you right there in front of your boyfriend. Then you run out and climbed into a taxi, and as if things weren't bad enough, you hear those words.
This is not your ride.
And you find out that you've just entered a stranger's car. But before I tell you how Mabel got to this heartbreaking point, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell. This story has more betrayal, heartbreak, and jaw-dropping moments than anything you've watched this week. Don't forget to comment on where you're watching from. We love to read your comments. Also, we've got a gift for you. Click the link in the description below to join our waitlist for your free ebook, How to Attract a High-Value Man Without Chasing. Let us go back to the beginning, so I can explain how Mabel ended up with a stepsister who made it her life's mission to ruin her. Mabel Carter was an only child. Her parents, Marcus and Gloria Carter, had tried for years before Mabel arrived. Those were years of quiet disappointment, hopeful mornings, and prayers whispered into pillowcases. And then, Mabel, a baby girl with a full head of curly black hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward. Marcus Carter was a billionaire. He had built one of the biggest tech companies, Carter AI Enterprise, from nothing in New York, working through nights that would have broken most people and making decisions that either paid off or nearly finished him. He was the kind of man who commanded a room without trying, but the moment they placed Mabel in his arms, he simply softened. He looked at his daughter the way some men look at sunsets, like she was proof that the world still had something good in it. Gloria was the same. She was the kind of mother who remembered everything. Which songs stopped Mabel from crying, which stuffed animal she couldn't sleep without, and exactly how she liked her hair braided on school mornings. She made their home feel like the warmest place on earth. Mabel grew up not just being told she was loved, but knowing it. There is a difference, and not every child gets to feel it. She was 13 when her mother died. It happened quickly, the way the worst things always do. Gloria got sick, then sicker, and then there was nothing left to try until she was gone. Just like that, Mabel went from having a mother who sang to her at bedtime to standing at a funeral in a black dress that felt wrong on her body, watching her father cry in a way that frightened her more than anything else she had ever seen. Grief does things to a body that no one fully prepares you for. Mabel started eating, not from hunger, but to fill a hollow void. She gained weight quickly, and the weight scared her. The fear only made it worse. The doctor said the emotional loss had triggered PCOS. Her metabolism had slowed, and her body was doing something her mind had no control over. She was 13 years old and already learning that life could take things without asking. Marcus watched his daughter and felt helplessness in a way his money could not fix. He thought what she needed was a mother. He met Marisol Flores at a business function, a stunning Latina with dark hair and a laugh that carried across rooms. She had a daughter from a previous marriage named Isabella, who was 15, 2 years older than Mabel. When Marcus introduced them, Marisol took Mabel's hands and looked at her with such warmth that Mabel, who was hungry for exactly that, believed every bit of it. They married within the year. For a while, things were good, or at least they looked that way. Marcus was happy, and Mabel told herself to be grateful. She told herself Isabella's coolness was just an adjustment period. Just two girls figuring out how to share a home. But Isabella Flores had decided from the very first day that she did not like Mabel Carter. It wasn't because of anything Mabel did or said. She disliked her because Marcus looked at Mabel the way Isabella had spent her whole life wanting someone to look at her. That specific, burning jealousy never left. It manifested in ways small enough to dismiss but consistent enough to feel like water wearing down stone. An eye roll when Mabel got a good grade. A smirk when she walked into a room, and comments about her body that were framed as concern, but delivered like weapons. Is that meal not too much for you? You should eat less, Isabella said at the dinner table one evening, her voice light, as if she were doing Mabel a favor. The whole table went quiet. Marcus put down his fork. The look he gave Isabella did not need volume. It was the quiet kind of look that carried more weight than any raised voice. If your portion seems too big, Isabella, Reduce your own. Don't ever speak to Mabel like that again. He turned to Mabel after that, and the warmth in his eyes was deliberate, making sure she felt it all the way through. Isabella looked at her mother, but Marisol looked away. Isabella ate the rest of her meal in silence, with something cold settling in her chest that would take years to fully reveal itself. Marcus knew his daughter. He had watched her absorb things instead of fighting back, swallowing other people's cruelty instead of rejecting it. He recognized it because her mother had been the same, sweet to a fault, and too trusting for her own good. He didn't want his daughter to be a pushover, too. He called Mabel to his room when she was 16. Just the two of them, the city glittering outside his window. She sat on the edge of his bed the way she had since she was small. You know, being a plus-sized cutie doesn't mean you have to take everything everyone does to you, he said. It's hard speaking up when everyone else has the perfect shape, Dad, Mabel said quietly. The perfect shape is not what is keeping you from speaking up. Your mother was slim her whole life, he told her, and she was still a pushover. Being slim never protected her from bullies, or from people who wanted to use her kindness. You understand what I'm telling you? I don't want you to be a pushover like your mom. Mabel looked at her hands. Dad, her voice broke slightly. You're slim. Mom was slim. Why am I like this? Marcus moved to sit beside her and took her hands in both of his. Because you're privileged, my little angel. Your mom and I weren't. We built this life so you wouldn't have to struggle the way we did. If that comfort comes with some extra weight, that is a fine trade. He paused. If you don't like it, change it. If you can't change it, accept it. But know this. There is not a woman out there more beautiful, stronger, or smarter than my little pumpkin. She cried into his shoulder that night. He held her and told her not to let anyone make her feel small. She needed to hear it then. She would need to remember it later. Less than a year after that conversation, Marcus Carter had a stroke. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was at the office. Then he was in an ambulance. Then he was in the ICU with machines doing the breathing his body had forgotten how to do. Mabel's world cracked open for the second time. She expected the people in that house to be her family, that this crisis would bring them together, the way crises are supposed to. She expected Marisol to hold things steady. Instead, Marisol removed her mask the same week Marcus was admitted. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The warmth disappeared overnight. Shopping trips became Isabella only. Mabel's food portions shrank, while Marisol told her it was time to lose weight anyway. New clothes appeared in bags for Isabella, while hand-me-downs appeared on Mabel's bed. And Marisol ensured Mabel was kept away from Marcus. She told the hospital Mabel was too emotional, and that visits would stress him. The day Mabel went to visit her dad at the hospital was the last day, because Mabel ensured to starve her for days, fire the old driver, and instructed the new driver to drive her straight home from school. Months passed. Mabel lay in her room at night and talked to Miss June, their nanny who had been with the family since before Mabel could walk, the one person in that house who still looked at her with love. I'm praying for your daddy, Miss June would say, smoothing Mabel's hair back the way her mother used to. He's coming back. Miss June knew how Marisol mistreated Mabel and hated it, but she couldn't speak up. She knew Marisol would fire her immediately, and she was the only remaining person dear to Mabel who provided a familiar, loving face. Mabel fasted. She prayed the kind of prayers that come from the very bottom of a person. She bargained with God and meant every word of it. One Monday morning, the hospital called. Marcus wanted to see them. When Mabel walked into that room, she had not seen her father in almost 2 years. He was thinner. His hands, strong hands she had held her whole life, looked fragile against the white sheets. The machines beeped steadily, and Mabel understood without being told that they were the only reason he was still there. She cried before she reached his bed. She could not help it. He told them the treatment was not working. It was draining everything and giving nothing back. He decided it was time to split his properties among his children. His homes and other real estate would go to Isabella. His company, Carter AI Enterprise, the one he had built himself, would go to Mabel. Marisol and Isabella exchanged a look. The company was failing, and the properties were worth more. But something behind Isabella's eyes hardened in a way that Mabel noticed even through her tears. I want to speak to my father alone, Mabel said. When the room cleared, The quiet that settled between them was the most honest quiet Mabel had ever known. "Have you been strong?" he asked. His voice was slower than she remembered. "You and Mom prepared me for the most comfortable life," she said, tears falling faster than she could wipe them, but it ended up being the hardest one. He looked at her with a softness that broke her and held her together at the same time. "You gave me your company, Dad. I'm 19. You know everyone I work with. You can oversee things until you finish school. I left you money for what you need." A slow breath. "I just need to know it's in safe hands." She saw how much speaking cost him and stopped arguing. She knew this wasn't the time to tell him that the woman he married despised her, or that leaving the properties to Isabella was a mistake. She didn't want the last words he heard to break his heart. She took his hand instead, and they both understood that this was the last time. They held each other the way you hold someone when you are trying to memorize the feeling of them. That was the last time. The funeral came quickly. Marisol had never been a patient woman. Mabel stood at that graveside and cried without caring who saw. She was officially alone in the world now. She felt every inch of it. The days that followed were the darkest of her life. Marisol and Isabella turned on her the way people turn on something they have been waiting to destroy for years. There were more insults and more slaps from Marisol for little to no reason. Her portions were tiny, but she dared not complain. Any time she did, there would be a sharp, casual, and relentless comment about her body. Mabel stayed because she had nowhere else to go. She knew that at some point she would have to leave, but she didn't know if she could cope outside her father's house. She repeated what her father had told her. She needed to have tough skin and be strong. But everyone has a limit. This night was the night Mabel decided she would rather suffer outside than in her own home. That day, Mabel was in her room studying when Isabella walked in looking for a headset. "Can't you see I'm looking for my headset? Get up and find it for me." Mabel did not look up from her book. "Why? Did I misplace it?" "I can see they didn't teach you responsibility, but you're old enough to learn it yourself." Isabella crossed the room and slapped her. Mabel stood up slowly. Something in her had simply run out. The last drop of tolerance was gone. She slapped Isabella back. Twice. Hard enough that Isabella stumbled backward. "You forget this house belongs to me?" Isabella said, her voice shaking with shock. "I blame my dad for making you his charity case," Mabel said. "You got everything? And you still hate me this much? For what?" She saw Marisol in the doorway. The look on her face was cold. It told Mabel that if she could hit her daughter, she had better be ready to leave. Mabel turned and packed her bag. "This was once a home," she said quietly. "Congratulations. You all ruined it. Enjoy your mansion." She left that evening with one bag and the money in the account her parents had opened for her. The apartment she moved into was nothing like the mansion, but it was hers. Entirely, completely hers. For the first time in 2 years, she slept through the night peacefully. There is something people do not understand about Mabel Carter. They see the weight, and they think softness. They hear the quiet, and they think weakness. They do not see the engine underneath, the thing her father built in her that hummed steadily, no matter what was happening on the surface. She had been in her apartment for 2 weeks, when she decided to go to the company for the first time. She had thought about how walking through those doors would bring back memories of her father. She had turned it over in her mind during the nights when the new apartment was too quiet. But thinking about something and standing inside it are two entirely different things. The building was on the east side of the city, 22 floors of glass and steel with her father's name on the lobby directory and letters she had to look away from quickly. The receptionist recognized her, as did 3 people in the elevator. Word moved fast when Marcus Carter's daughter walked in, and by the time she reached the floor where his office sat, she could feel the whole building recalibrating. People straightened at their desks, and conversations dropped to lower registers, as everyone quietly decided what she was going to be to them. She sat at his desk. She stood in the doorway of his office for a long moment, looking at the chair and the view of the city he had loved. Then she walked in, sat down, and put her hands flat on the surface of the desk the way she used to when she was small enough to sit on top of it and watch him work. She did not cry. She had cried enough. She just sat there and breathed and understood, in the quiet of that office, what he had given her and what he had asked of her by giving it. Then she asked for the financial reports. What she found was not good. The company had been bleeding for years. Though she didn't fully understand it yet, she knew she had to finish college properly to help her father's company heal. The numbers told a story of slow neglect, the kind that doesn't look catastrophic on any single day but compounds until the whole structure is compromised. Everything looked scary and overwhelming for a 19-year-old. It would have been easy to walk away. She had enough money to finish school and start something smaller and cleaner with no inherited damage. Nobody would have blamed her. But she was Marcus Carter's daughter. Walking away was never an option. She could not run it yet. She was still in college, with years between her and the degree that would give her the tools for what needed to be done. But she could learn. She could come every weekend, sit with the people her father had trusted, and understand the shape of the problem before she had the means to fix it. So that is what she did. Every Saturday she was there. She learned names, faces, and histories. She learned which managers had integrity and which ones had been hoping a grieving girl would sign whatever was put in front of her. She learned the difference between people who had loved her father and people who had simply profited from him. She filed all of it away. During the week she was in class, Marcus's will had covered tuition for both girls at the same college in New York. Mabel had known this would happen and made her peace with it. Isabella's presence was simply a condition of her life now, one of many uncomfortable things she had learned to move through without letting it slow her down. Isabella still found ways to make things difficult. The comments about Mabel's body didn't stop just because they were no longer under the same roof. The looks didn't change, nor did the little performances for whoever was nearby. The eye rolls, the stage whispers, and the laughter aimed in Mabel's direction. Isabella had always needed an audience for her cruelty, and she found one in college without any effort. Mabel stopped hearing it the same year she stopped flinching. It wasn't because it stopped hurting entirely, but because she had calculated where her energy needed to go, and Isabella wasn't on the list. She had a company to understand, a degree to finish, and a future to build from the raw materials of a difficult life. She did not have room for her stepsister's noise. She kept to herself, went to lectures, worked at the company on weekends, and then came home and worked some more. She wasn't unhappy, exactly. She was focused. There is a kind of peace that comes from having a clear purpose. Not joy, necessarily, but direction, which is sometimes more sustaining. That was when she met a student. His name was Trevor, and he was the first person in a long time who spoke to her like she was simply a person, not the fat girl, not Isabella's stepsister, just a person in a lecture hall who had said something interesting and whose opinion he wanted to hear. He would sit near her and ask about her assignments. He laughed at things she said, genuinely, not with the polite laugh people give when waiting for their turn to talk. He remembered the small things she told him, the kind of things people only remember when they are actually listening. Mabel was careful. She had learned to be. But she was also human. She had spent years being invisible in rooms full of people, and being truly seen does something to a person that is very difficult to guard against. She didn't say anything to anyone about how she felt. She didn't even fully admit it to herself. She just noticed that her days felt slightly different on the mornings she knew she would see him. She let herself have that much. Then she saw them together. She came around a corner in the main building, and there they were, Trevor and Isabella. His arm was easy around her shoulders, and her head was tilted toward him in that way that made whoever she was with feel like the most important person in the room. They were surrounded by a small crowd. Isabella saw her first. That smile spread across her face, the one that was never really a smile, but something else wearing a smile's clothes. If it isn't the fattest girl in school. The crowd shifted. Someone laughed quietly. Someone else looked away. Trevor's face showed a particular discomfort, the look of someone uneasy with what was happening but unsure of how to stop it. "I've always liked your sister," he said out loud, in front of everyone, and it was true. He liked Isabella so much that he wasn't able to caution her for being cruel. She understood before he finished. He had been talking to her because of Isabella. Proximity to Mabel was a way to get close to Isabella. The conversations, the remembered details, the feeling of being seen, all of it had been about someone else. "Don't tell me you thought he actually liked you?" "Ew," Isabella said, her voice carrying just enough to reach everyone. She pulled Trevor toward her and kissed him right there in the hallway, unhurried, her eyes open, and on Mabel the entire time. Mabel walked home. She held it together on the way back, on the subway, on the street, and in the elevator. She put the key in her door, closed it, and stood in the middle of her small apartment before sitting on the floor and crying. It was the ugly kind of crying that comes not from a single wound, but from the accumulation of every wound in the same place. She cried for Trevor, for the hope she had allowed herself, and because she was so tired of being the person things were done to, of being the one left with nothing while someone else walked away with everything, and of the loneliness of being the least important person in a room full of people. She cried until she ran dry. Then she wiped her face and sat up straight. She looked at the wall of her apartment, the one nobody could take from her, and made herself two promises. No more tears for that family. She had spent enough of herself on them. She was done. No more boys. Not until she was standing somewhere solid enough that her footing didn't depend on someone else's sincerity. She kept both promises completely, not as punishment, but as protection. It was the decision of a woman who finally understood the difference between what she wanted and what she could afford to want right now. She went back to work. She went back to the company on weekends. She finished her degree. She graduated and stepped into the CEO role that same summer. No ceremony, no celebration, just Mabel Carter, sitting down at her father's desk, with her diploma still in her bag, and a company that needed her. She was ready. 2 years later, the company had turned a 50% profit. People who had known Marcus Carter started watching his daughter with awe. She had his instincts, his patience, and his refusal to make the comfortable decision when the right one was available. She had something else, too. A hunger that only comes from having lost things and deciding you will not lose them again. She was becoming someone. Her father would have recognized her immediately. Isabella saw the profit headlines on a Tuesday morning. She was sitting in bed with her coffee and her phone when the news appeared. Carter AI Enterprise posts 50% profit growth. CEO Mabel Carter cited as driving force behind turnaround. She read it twice. Then she put her phone face down on the mattress and sat very still for a moment. The fat girl from the dinner table. The ugly girl that nobody supposedly wanted. Why was she rebuilding her father's company? How could she be thriving while Isabella was busy just being pretty? Mabel Carter was building something that made headlines, and a sudden jealousy flared. She needed what Mabel had. She felt she deserved it. She picked her phone back up and read it a third time. Something tightened behind her ribs that she didn't have a clean name for. It was uglier than jealousy. It was the rage of someone who believes the wrong person has been rewarded. She spent 2 days thinking. Then she started looking. She went through the company's public records, events, and pictures. She needed a way in, and since she wasn't the brightest, she knew she'd need help. She wasn't looking for a strategy. She was looking for a person. A man inside the company who had access, ambition, and the kind of weakness a beautiful woman could use. When she saw a photo of a man from one of the events, she decided to give it a shot. She would find him. Mid-30s. Senior position. The kind of face that probably got him further than his work did. She checked his social media and saw that he liked a pretty face. He was obsessed with women, and she knew he'd be perfect. She saw he went to a particular club on Fridays and decided to go there. She wore the red dress. Reed lost his train of thought twice while talking to her. She realized this would be easier than she'd expected. She decided to lead him on for a while, letting him catch feelings. Once she was certain of his affection, she had dinner with him and looked at him the way she had learned to look at men when she needed something. "There's something I need," she said. She told him about Mabel, about the company, about what she wanted. She knew now that Reed would do anything to have her. Reed listened. She watched his face move through confusion, then calculation, and finally the expression of a man who has just seen a door open that he thought was permanently closed. "What do you want me to do?" "Date her," Isabella said simply. "What?" "My stepsister. Date her. Get close to her. Get access." She tilted her head slightly. "And then we figure out the rest together." He was quiet for a moment as he processed the strangeness of the request. Then something shifted. Mabel Carter, CEO. The company. If he was really close to the CEO, the things he could access and do. "And what do I get?" he asked. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. A raise, a promotion, a pause, and me. Reed agreed before she finished the sentence. She had known he would. That was the thing about men like Reed. They weren't complicated. They wanted things, and they wanted someone to tell them the wanting was justified. Isabella was very good at making people feel their worst instincts were reasonable. The plan took shape over the weeks that followed. Isabella had the access to Mabel's world through Reed, but she did not know enough about the company's structure to know where to strike. Reed knew the inside of that company, the way people know buildings they have worked in for years, which doors were left unlocked, which systems had gaps, which processes nobody was watching closely. We still have one big issue. I need to get into the company, Isabella said, pouting. The shares, he told her one evening. That's how you get a seat at the table. He told her how had opened the company's shares to external buyers, a move that had partly driven the company's growth, giving the market a stake in its success. If Isabella purchased enough to place herself among the top 1% of shareholders, she would have standing. She would have a vote. She would be in that boardroom with a legal right to be there. How much? He told her. The number sat in the air, and Isabella went very still. She had money. Her father had left her properties and assets, but she calculated quickly and realized it wasn't nearly enough. She sold every property she had inherited. She converted everything that could be converted. She counted what remained, and it still fell short. She needed about $6 million more. She tried her best to find a way, but nothing was working. She finally told Reed she didn't have enough and that there was no point going forward. He saw her frustration and told her he knew someone who could bridge the gap, a mafia contact from his past he had wanted to forget. He warned her it would come at a cost, but her eyes lit up. She didn't care. He made the call and set up a meeting. She went to meet with the Mafian boss alone. The Mafia's office had no sign on the door, which she filed away carefully. His office was on the 4th floor of a building that looked like it housed accountants. The man himself looked like someone who had long stopped being impressed by anything. He listened to what she needed, without expression. If I'm giving you $6 million, I'm expecting $10 million in return. Wow, $4 million in interest? She asked. That's not the interest. That's just the payment. You'll still owe interest. What do you have to offer as interest? The man asked coldly. Isabella gave him a seductive look, knowing few men could resist her charm. We could, go to your place and have some fun. He looked at her with the flat, complete disinterest of someone who had been offered that particular currency so many times it had lost all value. He did not even respond. He simply stayed silent, as though she hadn't spoken, as though she should know to try something else. She had never been looked at that way before, like her beauty was simply not relevant. It unsettled her more than she showed. She offered him shares in the company instead, a percentage, even after the debt was repaid. His expression shifted by a fraction. That was interest. That was something he could work with. They shook hands. The shares were purchased. The coalition was forming. The plan was in motion. Isabella called her mother. Go, she said. Go to her office and brag. Let her see you. I want her to know we're in her company now. Marisol was dressed beautifully as usual. She walked into the office with her stepdaughter's name on the door. Her face squeezed at the sight of her name on that office. She sat down across from her like she had every right to be there. Which, legally, now, she did. Security can be here in under 2 minutes, Mabel said. She did not look up from what she was reading. Is that how you treat a shareholder? Mabel looked up slowly. She looked at Marisol, this woman who had made her life so hard she had to move out of her father's house. And for a minute she was shocked. How could they afford to be one of her company's shareholders? They didn't have that amount of money. But she didn't let Marisol see her shock. Her face turned cold again. Then she looked back at her document. Then I'll expect you at the next shareholder meeting, she said. Not in my office. The door closed. Mabel's hands gripped the edge of the desk. She sat in the quiet and breathed through what had just happened. Then she let go of the desk and went back to work. Reed, meanwhile, finally approached Mabel. He smiled at her at the right times, spoke to her in the most charming manner, looked deep into her eyes while he spoke to her. He made himself visible in the right moments, available in the right conversations. She was cautious at first. The Trevor wound had not fully healed. She kept him at a distance, watching for something she couldn't name. She didn't find it because Reed was careful. He remembered small things, like how she took her coffee and which projects stressed her. He showed up when she was overwhelmed, asked the right questions, and listened in a way that made her feel understood. He made himself necessary gradually, the way water finds its way into everything. 3 months in, she started to trust him. 4 months in, she stopped watching for cracks. 6 months in, she was in love with him. Or what she believed was love. What it feels like when someone has made themselves into the shape of everything you needed, and you cannot yet see the seams. On the other side of the world, in Seoul, Kang Jae-won was angry. Not the loud kind of angry, the quiet kind. The kind that sits in the chest and doesn't move. He had just come off a call with his father. The decision had been made, his parents had decided, and no amount of argument from Jae-won had changed anything. His younger sister Soo-yeon was getting married. To a man chosen for her. To a man she barely knew. And she was moving to New York to do it. His phone rang. He already knew who it was before he picked up. Oppa. Her voice was small, the one she used when she was failing to hold back tears. Dad said it's final. I have to marry him. I don't even know this man, and they want me to move to New York. Soo-yeon. I hate this, she said, and then she was crying properly, the way she cried when she had been holding it for too long. He went quiet. He hated this. Hated that his parents could dictate her life in a way they had never quite managed with him. He had fought them in meeting after meeting. He had sat across from his father and laid out every reasonable argument he had and watched his father nod and change nothing. His parents had decided, and the decision was done, and the only thing left was to manage what came next. I'm sorry, Cupcake, he said. It was the only honest thing he had left to offer. He flew to New York 2 weeks later. He knew he could not stop the wedding, but he could be there. He could stand next to his sister and make sure she knew she was not alone in it. That was the most he could do, and he intended to do it completely. He met Hyun-soo, the fiancé, at a family dinner the evening he arrived. He hadn't liked him from the photograph, and he liked him even less in person. There was something in the way Hyun-soo moved through a room, like it already belonged to him. Like every person in it was a prop in a story he was telling about himself. He watched Hyun-soo speak to Soo-yeon. The way his hand went to her arm felt more like acclaim than warmth. Jae-won noticed how Soo-yeon's shoulders pulled in, a sign she was uncomfortable. Hyun-soo found him after dinner. The brother-in-law-to-be, he said, extending his hand with the particular pride of a man who considers himself a prize. I've heard a lot about you. Jae-won shook it. I'm just her brother. For now. Hyun-soo smiled like that was a joke. Your sister is going to make a wonderful wife. His eyes moved across the room to where Soo-yeon was standing, and the look in them was not warmth. She has the perfect look. I didn't know you married only for looks, Jae-won said. Hyun-soo laughed. That's what women are for, to look good for their men. He walked away after that. Back into the party, back into the room, completely unbothered. Jae-won stood where he was and watched him go. Something cold and decided settled in his chest. He hated everything the man represented, and he was going to make sure this wedding doesn't happen. During the relationship, Reed was always at Mabel's apartment. She went to his place once, and he said the timing wasn't right, and that he needed to be somewhere as soon as possible, that they'd plan something better next time. Next time never came. With time, she would get to understand why. Because his apartment was the place he was actually himself. Hers was the stage. He used her computers often. Always a small excuse. His laptop needed charging. A file was easier to access from hers. It would only take a minute. She let it go every single time because she trusted him, and trust, when it is real, makes you blind in ways you cannot know until you can see again. What she did not know was that every time he sat at her computer, he was forging her signature on transactions she had never approved. He was planting financial records that made her look like she was stealing from her own shareholders. He was building a case against her, quietly, methodically, over months, and he was keeping an eye and informing Isabella about which shareholders were most likely to believe it and which ones were too loyal to touch. They built their coalition and whispered their way through the boardroom. They waited. And finally, they'd turned most of the shareholders against Mabel. They had finally gotten enough numbers. Isabella was overjoyed. She sat across from Marisol at the dinner table that evening, the two of them eating and smiling over their food like it was already done. "Mom, we're ready," Isabella said. Marisol smiled into her plate. "After the meeting tomorrow, Mabel will lose her company as she should," Isabella said. "She's a bitter, entitled brat. She's such a hateful child," Marisol said, reaching for her glass. "I'm glad her father died. He was always too soft with her." They continued eating, smiling. They did not know Miss June was in the hallway and had overheard everything. She immediately picked up the phone to warn Mabel. Mabel was at the spa when the call came, her first day off in months. She had turned her phone face down. The screen lit up with an unknown number. She almost let it go. She was tired, and the water was warm, and whatever it was could wait. Something made her pick up. Miss June's voice came through low and careful. "Baby, listen to me. I think they're planning something against you. Isabella mentioned voting you out tomorrow morning." Mabel sat up. "I don't know everything," Miss June said. "But baby, it sounded serious." Mabel froze for a moment, then started moving. She needed to talk to Reed immediately. She needed to tell him what had happened, needed to hear his voice, needed him to help her make sense of it. She could not wait for her driver. She had told him to come pick her up in 5 hours, and 5 hours was too long. She stopped the first taxi she saw and gave Reed's address. When she got to his house, she banged on the door. "Give me a minute." The irritation in his voice was unguarded and real. He opened the door, and his face shifted from surprise to a split-second calculation she'd understand later. She noticed that she'd never really been to his place. It was only that one time when he was in so much hurry to leave, they were always at hers. His house was smaller than she saw it the last time, but that wasn't her problem. She had an issue, and as she was shaking and about to talk, she saw a woman's clothing on the chair. "Mabel, what are you doing here?" She was shaking. She opened her mouth to tell him about the call, but her eyes were fixed on the shirt. A woman's top, draped over the armrest. The color of it, the style of it. Familiar in the way that things are familiar when you have been around them your whole life, and hated them your whole life. Does that belong to someone? Yes, Mabel. She knew the voice before the bedroom door opened fully. She had known that voice since she was 13, and it had never once meant anything good. Isabella walked out. She crossed to Reed without hurrying. She kissed him on the mouth the way you kiss someone in front of an audience. Slow, deliberate, making sure every second registers. Reed let her. He was afraid. But he let her, because tomorrow, it wouldn't matter anyway. "Why, Reed?" She said his name the way you say something you are letting go of. "Once again," Isabella said, and there was something almost gentle in her voice, the cruelty of it dressed in softness. She thought someone could love her. "Darling, anyone who has ever been around you was around you because of me. There are things that hurt because they are new. And then there are things that hurt because they are old, because they confirm something you have been fighting your whole life not to believe about yourself." This was the second kind. Mabel turned and found the door. She did not run. She walked. She walked out of his building and into the New York night, and kept walking until the air was in her lungs, and the street was around her, and she stopped on the pavement and let the tears come, because there was nothing left to hold them with. She walked. She walked until she saw a taxi at the curb, and reached for the door, and got in, and said, "Please drive." Silence. "Please, Ma'am." The voice was deep and confused. "This is not your taxi." Mabel opened her eyes. He was already looking at her. Not with irritation, with quiet attention, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. He was sitting in the back seat with a camera resting in his hands, and he was, even through everything, even now, the most strikingly handsome man she had ever seen in her life. Golden hair, the color of late afternoon light, a jaw that could have been cut from something expensive, shoulders that filled his jacket in a way that was entirely effortless, and eyes, dark, direct, looking at her with something she could only describe as careful. He was a passenger, and she had thrown herself into the cab as if it were hers. She started crying harder because of course, on the worst night of her life she was doing this. He did not ask her to leave. He looked at her for a moment, and then reached into his jacket pocket and held out a handkerchief. She took it. She pressed it against her face. She cried the way you cry when you have finally run out of anywhere to put it. He waited. Kang Jae-won had not planned his evening this way. He had come out of a restaurant earlier and spotted Hyun Soo, his sister Soo Yun's fiancé, walking out of a hotel with a woman who was not his sister. He had not been fast enough to photograph it. He had sent his driver home and flagged down a regular taxi because no one thinks twice about a taxi following someone in New York. He had been parked outside the building, camera ready, watching Hyun Soo across the street and taking pictures of him and that woman, because he knew that man would never be suitable for his sister. Then the back door flew open. He had frozen for a split second, thought he had been seen. Then he looked at the woman now beside him in the back seat and understood that this had nothing to do with him. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere much worse than the night she was physically in. He let her cry. He gave her the quiet. He was not uncomfortable with silence the way some people would have been. After a while, she lowered the handkerchief and looked at him. He looked back. She had long curly black hair and eyes swollen from crying, and a face that was, even now, even like this, beautiful in a way that did not require ideal circumstances to be obvious. There was something in the way she held herself, even in the middle of falling apart. A quality that said she had done this before and knew how to survive it. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected. "It's all right." She reached for the door handle. "With the way you were crying," he said. "I'm guessing you don't have many people to talk to right now." He said calmly. "You can just talk to me. What's the harm? I'm a stranger." He was really curious as to what would have made her cry all the way into a parked taxi. She looked at him measuring something. Then she turned and pointed at the building across the street. "That's my boyfriend's apartment. He's in there with my stepsister." Jae-won's eyes went to the building. Something tightened in his jaw because it was the same betrayal that brought him there. And then she continued calmly. She talked like someone who has been holding everything too tight for too long and something has finally given way. And then she talked. She told him about Isabella, how she had taken everything her whole life and was somehow still not satisfied. Now, she had taken Reed, about how she received a call while she was at the spa telling her they were planning something, that by tomorrow evening she could lose her company. She told him about her father's company and how it was the most important thing to her, and now she was about to lose it, the company her late parents gave to her. She talked about how she was tired of being the victim and how she wanted to make everyone pay. She cried in the middle of it. She stopped, cried again. Then, like a page turning, she ran dry. She wiped her face and sat up straighter and let out a long, slow breath. "Thank you," she said. "I'll go now. How can I help?" He didn't know why he asked her that, but he knew the pain he felt in his chest just listening to her talk. And he knew if just listening to her hurt him this much, then he couldn't imagine the hurt that she would be feeling. The laugh that came out of her was small and tired and real. "Unless you have $2 billion lying around somewhere to buy my company, you can't help me." She looked at him when she said it, expecting a polite smile. His expression did not move. Something shifted in his eyes, a quiet recalibration, like someone who has just been given information that changes the shape of the room. "What if I have it?" he said as he reached into his jacket and held out a card. She read the card and realized he wasn't just anyone. "I know what you're thinking. Of course he gives her the $2 billion. But you should know, he came all the way there to stop his parents from bullying his sister. Jae-won is not the kind of man that stood and watched anyone get bullied. If you've come this far and you're enjoying the story, smash the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Also, comment. Are you rooting for Mabel and Jae-won? Let's get back to the story. "My company is worth over $90 billion, he said. "I personally am worth over $8 billion. And honestly, I want to buy your company if that helps you. I just need to hear the plan." She stared at him, then at the card, and then back at him. She told him she didn't know what exactly they had done or why her shareholders had turned against her. Only that they had, and that tomorrow morning something was coming that she couldn't see yet. But she knew one thing. The only way to make the whole thing void, to pull the ground out from under whatever they had built against her, was for her to not be the CEO anymore. If she sold the company to him, handed it over completely, there would be nothing left to vote on. And while he held it, she could figure out what had been done and how, and fix it before she took it back. Jae-won listened. He nodded slowly. "So what you need is time," he said. "Yes, she said quietly. Just time. He looked at her for a moment. Then she finally spoke. Good. Then we go to my lawyer tonight. We need everything in writing that protects me and my company. He looked at her. So you don't trust me? Did you hear that my boyfriend is sleeping with my stepsister? I don't trust anybody, she said plainly. And then slowly, without planning to, a smirk built on her lips. She didn't know where it came from exactly. Maybe because something that felt impossible 20 minutes ago was beginning to have a shape. Or maybe it was those eyes, the way they looked at her like she was someone worth figuring out. They went to his lawyer's office. The city outside moved at its nighttime speed, slower than day, but still moving, still loud. Inside, the office was bright and professional, and very expensive. They sat across from each other at a long table and went through the contract line by line. J1 would purchase the company for $2 billion, double its worth. In 3 months, he was legally obligated to sell it back, provided Mabel had the funds. He added a clause. She could buy it back at the exact price she sold it, regardless of its value in 3 months. She caught it. She turned to look at him. He was reading the next page like what he did wasn't a big deal, like he hadn't just quietly forfeited millions of dollars by adding that clause, like he didn't know that clause was designed to protect her finances. He excused himself to take a call. She came out of the restroom a few minutes later and caught the end of it, his voice completely different. Softer, Korean, the kind of gentle that comes out only around people you love without condition. I have the photos, Cupcake. I know how to stop this now. I promise. Go to sleep. He ended the call and saw her. Something moved across his face, a brief color, quickly controlled. Like he hadn't meant for her to see that version of him. My sister, he said, gesturing to the phone. She must be one lucky girl. I hope she's okay. He was quiet for a moment. She will be. He said it the way her father used to say things, like a promise that had already been decided. They went to Mabel's office. There was no point going anywhere else. The meeting was in the morning and there was no time left for sleep or sentiment. Her driver had come back with fresh clothes and food. The office had a bathroom to change in. They set up at the conference table with laptops and documents, and the focused quiet of 2 people who understood the stakes. They worked. Really worked. Going through every angle of what was going to happen in that boardroom, what Isabella would present, how Jae-won's presence changed every move available to her. He was sharp. She would notice something and say half of it, and he would finish the thought. Not in the way of people trying to impress each other. In the way of 2 people who happen to think similarly and have found themselves on the same side of a problem. Around midnight, somewhere between a financial projection and a legal clause, he said something that made her laugh so hard before she could stop herself. A short, genuine sound that startled her with its realness. She covered her mouth. He looked back at his laptop. But the corner of his mouth had moved. She went back to the spreadsheet. The room felt different after that. Not warmer exactly, more real. Like the space between them had become slightly less formal without either of them deciding it should. At one point she reached for a file on the edge of the table, and so did he at the same moment, and their hands landed on it at the same time. They both pulled back immediately. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them looked directly at the other for about 30 seconds afterward. She was aware of him in the way you become aware of someone, when something in you has decided to pay attention against your better judgment. The way he leaned forward when he was reading something closely. The way he sat back when he was thinking. The steadiness of him. There was no anxiety in the room that came from him, only from her situation. And she found herself borrowing against that steadiness, without intending to. Around 2 a.m, she fell asleep at her desk. She had been reading a document and explaining something, and then the words went soft, and her head went down, and she was simply gone. Jae-won looked over at her. Her long curly hair had fallen across her arms. Her breathing had evened out, and her face had lost the tension it wore when she was awake. The constant low-level brace of someone who has been managing things alone for a long time. She looked younger. He stood quietly. He took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. He stood there a moment longer than was necessary. He thought how today had not been exactly what he planned, and wondered why he was so interested in ensuring she came out of this successful, or why staring at her now was making him feel the way he felt. After a while, he sat back down. He worked until the city started coming back outside the windows. When she woke up 2 hours later, she sat up straight and looked around with the disoriented expression of someone who had not meant to sleep. Her eyes found him. He was reading something on his screen. "You should have woken me," she said. "You needed your rest," he said, turning a page. She realized his jacket was on her shoulders. She looked down at it. She felt the warmth of it, the weight of it, that particular weight of something borrowed from someone taller than you. She looked back up at him. He had already moved on to the next document. She did not give the jacket back. Across the city, Isabella Flores stood in front of her mirror and straightened her dress and felt the sweet hum of someone who believes they have already won. Marisol was in the next room. Reed had been sending updates all week. "By this evening," Isabella said with a wide smile, "everything will be over." The shareholders filed in ones and twos. Mabel said good morning to the ones who met her eyes. She said nothing to the ones who didn't. Reed came in without looking at her at all, and for one brief, unguarded moment she felt the full weight of what that meant. 6 months. She had given him 6 months. She put it down. This was not the time to be thinking of her mistakes. Isabella arrived last, Marisol beside her, dressed like she was going somewhere worth dressing for. She walked in with the quiet confidence of someone holding a winning hand. She took her seat and looked across the table at Mabel. And the look was almost kind. That was the cruelest part of Isabella. She could make cruelty look like concern. The meeting was called. Isabella stood, and the room that had been murmuring and shuffling went quiet. She was dressed perfectly. She had prepared. This was not the Isabella who made comments at dinner tables or kissed boys in hallways to make a point. This was something more dangerous. Isabella with a purpose. Isabella with a plan she had spent months building. Isabella who had finally found an arena where her particular kind of ruthlessness had a stage. Mabel let her speak, curious to see what had been used to turn the shareholders against her. She pulled up the first document, then the second, then the third. Forged signatures, planted transactions, financial records that painted Mabel Carter as a woman who had been stealing from the very people who trusted her, her father's people, the shareholders who had believed in the company she had dragged back from the edge with her bare hands. Mabel sat and said nothing. She understood now that Isabella had forged documents. She had already suspected that forgery would be involved, because there was no her stepsister would play fair, but at least how she know exactly what she forged. Mabel continued to listen quietly. She let every word land, every slide, every number, every document that carried her name, and not her hand. She sat with her hands flat on the table, and her face completely still, and she listened to Isabella dismantle everything she had built, one fabricated page at a time. And then the signatures came up on the screen. Her own name, her own handwriting, or something close enough to it that a room full of people who didn't know her hand would never question it. Transaction after transaction, authorization after authorization, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. That was when she understood it. The fact that Reed always stayed over at her place and he never wanted her in his own place, because he had access to her at her place, and he was busy plotting against her in his own place. Everything started to make sense. Every time Reed said his laptop needed charging, every time he said it would only take a minute, every time she walked past him at her desk and thought nothing of it because she trusted him, because she had chosen to trust him, had decided deliberately to let someone in after years of keeping everyone out. He had been here, building this, using the access she gave him freely to take everything she had. Her eyes filled, the room blurred at the edges. She blinked once, hard, felt the tears go back down somewhere deep, where she would deal with them later. Not here, not in this room, not in front of Isabella, who was standing at the head of the table looking at her with the small, satisfied expression of someone who has been waiting years for this exact moment. Not here. She had cried in front of them before. She had cried at dinner tables and in hallways and in her own room, while they ate and smiled in the room below. She had cried every kind of cry this family had ever made her cry. Not here. Not today. Not in this room. She breathed. Isabella finished. The room was silent. Mabel exhaled. "All of those documents are fake," she said. Isabella tilted her head. "Can you prove that before I remove you from your seat?" Mabel said nothing. Then, Those who accept that Mabel Carter be removed as CEO, say aye. Over 70% said aye. Reed said aye without looking up. Mabel's trusted people stayed silent and still. Isabella smiled the biggest smile Mabel had seen in years. She began quoting the bylaws, her voice rising with each line, each sentence bringing her closer to the thing she had been engineering for months. And Mabel laughed, softly, almost to herself. Not at Isabella, at something else, entirely. At the particular irony of someone spending this much energy destroying a thing they never built. Isabella looked at Mabel, laughed in shock, and froze. "That is your CEO," Mabel said. The door opened, and Kang Jae-won walked in. The room went quiet, shareholder by shareholder, as they processed what they were seeing. A man none of them recognized walking to the head of the table, like he had every reason to be there, which he did. And from everything you just presented, you didn't say a single thing about why he shouldn't be here. Is this a joke? Marisol asked. No, Mabel said. I needed capital, so I sold him the company. It's worth $1 billion. He bought it for $2 billion. I didn't even know you were planning this. Isabella was thinking fast. Mabel could see it, the calculations running behind her eyes, scanning for the next available angle. Now, Mabel continued, I'm going to find out exactly how those documents were made. And because you are not the CEO, you cannot delete anything from the system or cover your tracks. This new CEO, however, has granted me full access to find out how I was wronged. She looked around the table, and as the company bylaw states, any forgery used to undermine a shareholder's credibility, if proven false, will result in that shareholder's assets being frozen. Or if they'd prefer to dispute it, they are welcome to take their chances in court. That's not part of the bylaws, Reed said sharply. Jae-won looked up from the table for the first time. You're not up to date, Jae-won said calmly. It was updated 6 hours ago. By me. The room went very still. Isabella sat quietly. Then something shifted behind her eyes. A calculation completed. A decision made. She turned to the room. He forged those files. If the files were fake, it was all him, she said. Her voice was steady, practiced. He gave them to me and told me he had found evidence. I didn't know any of it was fake. Marisol nodded quickly beside her. Mabel turned to Reed. Reed's jaw tightened. His chair scraped back as he stood. She was the one that came to me, he said, his voice cracking at the edges. She planned every single part of this. She told me exactly what she wanted and exactly what to do. I want you to know all your confessions are being recorded, Jae-won said quietly. Both of them stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Mabel laughed. She was stunned. She was surprised how she didn't need to do much. So it's that easy to turn on people you work with? She shook her head slowly. I thought I'd have to do the research myself to find the answer. But apparently, Isabella, you're a gift that just keeps giving. I didn't do it alone, Reed said, shaking now. I forged the files, yes. But she showed them to the shareholders. She ran the whole thing. Isabella had already found her escape. She turned to Jae-won, her voice going smooth and almost pleasant. Sadly, there is no bylaw stating that those who showed the files to shareholders lose their shares. A pause. Is there? Jae-won shook his head once. Mabel felt it, a drop behind her ribs. Isabella had found the one door left unlocked, and she was already through it. She looked at Jae-won. He looked back at her, and she could see it in his face too. There was nothing left to catch her with. Isabella was going to walk out of this room clean. The bylaw, however, caught Reed. His assets were frozen. He sat down and said nothing more. He had lost everything he came for. The position, the shares, the woman. And it showed in the particular stillness of a person who has nothing left to protect. The room started to clear. Shareholders gathered their things and filed out in ones and twos, the quiet murmur of people who had just watched something they were still processing. Reed left without looking at anyone. Marisol followed Isabella out with her chin up, the way women do when they are pretending they are not rattled. And then it was just the two of them. Mabel stood up from her chair and walked to Jae-won and hugged him. She didn't plan to. Her arms were around him before she had decided anything, her face against his shoulder. And then the tears came. Not the desperate broken kind from the taxi the night before. Something different. Something that felt like every tightly held thing in her chest, finally releasing at once. She had her company back. Her father's company. The one he trusted her with when she was so young. She held Jaewon tighter and cried into his shoulder and didn't care how it looked. He held her back. Steadily. Fully. Without saying anything. After a while, she pulled back. She looked up at him, and he was already looking at her. At her eyes. At the tears on her face. At something else she couldn't quite name. He reached up and cleaned her cheek with his thumb. And then he saw her lips, and there was something in him that wanted to lean in. He tried to hold back, and for what felt like a minute he did, but then he did. He kissed her lips. She pulled back immediately. "I'm sorry," she said, wondering why she was apologizing and also wondering why she was afraid of him. Maybe because she's been used so much, and now every man that appears seems too good to be true. Something moved across his face, patient and unhurried. "I get it, Mabel," he said, his voice low. "But I want you to know something. You can be loved. You are worth every love that you receive. You are the most brilliant, beautiful, strong woman I have ever seen." She heard her father in those words. She remembered that time he called her into the room, his hands around hers, his voice telling her there was not a woman alive, more beautiful or stronger or smarter than his little pumpkin. She heard it in Jaewon's voice and felt it land in exactly the same place her father's words had always landed, somewhere deep and old and real. She turned back and held him close. He kissed her properly this time, slow and certain. The kind of kiss that is not an impulse, but a decision. Against her lips, quiet and warm, he told her he had been wanting to do that since she fell into his taxi crying, and still managed to be sarcastic about $2 billion. She laughed into his mouth. A real laugh. The kind she had forgotten she was capable of 2 days ago. "I wasn't being sarcastic," she said. "You looked at me and said, unless you have $2 billion, you can't help me, as if that were reasonable to say to a stranger," he said. She laughed again. It felt like something coming back to life. Reed Collins sat in his car in the parking structure for a long time after the building emptied. He had lost his shares, his position, the woman he had ruined a relationship, and his integrity, and 6 months of his life for, who had turned on him in that boardroom without blinking, without hesitation, without a single backward look. He sat there and let the full weight of it settle. Then he picked up his phone. He called the number he had given Isabella some months ago, when she needed to collect the $6 million loan. Isabella had told him the agreement she had with the mafia, which included shares in a company that she thought would be hers, but isn't. "She can't pay you back in full. She even told me she doesn't want to pay you at all," Reed said. His voice was very calm for someone burning everything down. "She wants to take your money because she lost the deal and didn't get the company. I'd go find her before she tries to run." He ended the call. He sat back. He felt nothing except the particular hollowness of a man who has just done the last thing he has left to do. In less than 24 hours, Mabel noticed Isabella taking out all the shares in her company. Why was she liquidating everything? Mabel was shocked. It was later Miss June called Mabel. "Baby, something is happening at the house. You should know." Mabel listened. Then she went to the window and looked at the city. The same city her father had built something in. The same city she had built something in. And she stood there while Miss June told her what she was seeing. Isabella and Marisol moving through the mansion, with the urgency of people running out of time. Designer bags carried to waiting cars. Jewelry, artwork, everything that could be converted quickly. The kind of clearing out that happens when someone is not packing to leave. They are liquidating because something is coming, and they need whatever they can carry before it arrives. Miss June just told her what she heard yesterday. She heard Isabella asking for more time from someone she borrowed money. It seems like he didn't give her more time. That was when Mabel understood everything. How Isabella was able to get the money to buy the shares in her company. She borrowed it. She smiled at the thought that karma can be harsh. She couldn't pay up the money she loaned, most especially now the shares' value had reduced. "Miss June, I think it's time you come work with me, because that house is about to fall apart. I don't think they'd be able to afford you anymore," Mabel said with a smirk. And that was how Isabel and Marisol started to sell off everything to pay the mafia, who had increased his money from 10 million to 12 million, since she didn't have any shares to give him. Every property that Marcus left for them, including the mansion they lived in, gone. Isabella had to collect more loan to complete the $12 million. She started with $4 million in property and left with $2 million debt and a mafia threatening their life. They had come into Mabel's life with nothing except Marisol's beauty and the willingness to use it. And they were leaving it the same way. And now, even worse off. Mabel stood at her window for a long time. She thought about her father. About 19-year-old Mabel sitting at his desk for the first time. How enormous it had felt. How impossible. She thought about the years between that first day and this one. The things she had learned to carry. The things she had refused to put down. Her whole life journey, she heard that Marisol had sold her father's mansion. Good riddance, she said to herself. That was the end of that chapter. That house brought her a lot of bad memories, and it was high time she moved on from it. 2 days later, Jaewon sat down with both families and laid the photographs on the table. Hyun-soo on the street with a woman, another photograph of him kissing the woman. The evidence was quiet and irrefutable, and his parents had nothing left to argue with. The wedding was canceled. Soo-yeon hugged her brother after the meeting that evening. She cried the way Mabel had cried after the boardroom. In relief, in release, in the feeling of something heavy being finally lifted. Thank you, she kept saying. Appa, thank you. Jaewon finally felt relieved. Jaewon had planned to be in New York for 2 weeks, but 3 months later he was still beside Mabel. He was falling for her. The contract was fulfilled. Jaewon signed the company back to Mabel in the same lawyer's office where they had drafted everything. The same late-night quiet. The same expensive stillness. She signed her name back onto everything she had built and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized as the feeling of a thing being restored to its right place. Her father's company. Her father's name on the door. Hers. The day Jaewon left for Seoul, she walked him down to the building entrance. They stood on the pavement with the city moving around them, their breath visible in the cold air. Neither of them making the first move toward goodbye. She had known him for 3 months, and it felt like longer. It felt like the kind of longer that has nothing to do with time. Thank you, she said. For everything. You are always welcome, he said, looking deep into her eyes. Jaewon? Mabel. She almost smiled. Safe flight. He picked up his bag. He walked toward the car. She watched him go, the line of his shoulders, the gold of his hair catching the gray morning light, the particular way he moved through a space, like he had already decided where he was going. He stopped. He turned. That smile, the quiet, devastating one she had first seen in the back of a taxi on the worst night of her life, came back like it had never left. I've seen New York, he said. Next time you'll see Seoul. He got into the car. The car pulled away. She watched it until it turned the corner, and the street was just a street again. She stood there on the pavement of her city, outside the building she had saved, wearing a coat she had bought with money she had earned, her long curly hair loose around her shoulders in the cold, and she smiled until her cheeks ached. The way her chest ached at the thought of not seeing him again, she knew she'd see Seoul soon. So let me ask you something before you go. At what point did you know Mabel was going to win? Because I think I was beginning to doubt if Mabel would be able to win at all. Drop your answer in the comments right now. I want to know. And also tell me what part of the story melted your heart and what part broke your heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if you want to get our free ebook, How to Attract a High-Value Man Without Chasing, don't forget to click the link in the description below and join our waitlist. And I'll see you in the next one.